Before we start, we'd like to introduce our team of support specialists who contributed to the work for this session. My name is Courtney Grant, and I'm an ELA Instructional Support Specialist.
Hi, and I'm Maggie Carrillo. I am a Teacher Support Specialist for Elementary English Language Arts.
So my name is Tara Byers, and I am a Math Teacher Support Specialist, and I'm kind of a new addition to the team, so I'm very happy to be here with you all.
And my name is Anna Kay. I'm one of the behavior support specialists on our team.
My name is Angela Pacheco, and I'm the behavior support specialist.
So this is our recording notice for this session. We are recording this session so that professional learning can be accessible to all APS employees now and in the future. Recordings may be placed on various APS resources such as department websites, Google Classrooms, or our APS YouTube channel. By continuing in this Google Meet session, you're consenting to be recorded. And I would like to note that in a Google Meet, your image will not be shown in the recording unless you are speaking aloud to the group. So today we have some virtual norms for this space. Please mute yourself unless you're sharing with the group, but cameras are your choice. So we recognize that the internet sometimes works better if your camera is off, and there are plenty of ways for you to engage with us today, even without your camera on. We ask that you set some intentions today for how you want to come into this space and what you'd like to learn today. We encourage you to try some new things that you will hear about in the presentation today. And finally, we ask that you ask questions at any point in the chat box. Definitely utilize that chat box. We'll be watching for questions and comments throughout the session. During this 55-minute session, we will focus on the agenda that's shown here on this slide. In connection with best practices, we're going to consider your current SEL mentality and background knowledge around SEL. In doing so, we'll understand and acknowledge where we are at with SEL in our current context. After that, we'll provide some background knowledge and context about the SEL framework. And then next, we'll discuss a SEL reflection protocol that we'll use in small breakout groups. In this session, the protocol that we use will be a modified version to best support all participants in this space, but we'll also provide you with the full reflection protocol after the session today in the event that you'd like to take it back and use it at your school site with your staff or students. So when we come back from breakout groups, then we'll share out what we discussed during the protocol time. And finally, we'll provide you with some additional resources that you could use to support this work with staff and students at your site, as well as our content. Leave some space for questions. Our objectives for this session are centered around the three key actions of establish, engage, and transfer. So we aspire to establish common knowledge around CASEL's framework and SEL and its core competencies. We'll engage in reflective practice that allows us to begin with ourselves and foster growth, development, and change. And lastly, we hope that you can transfer this protocol to your context and use it with staff and students. It's a really powerful reflective site or tool, and I think that you'll see that today.
So before we begin, I'd love for you all to just take a minute and think about and set some intentions. So why did you come to this session? Why are you here today? So I'm going to give you a minute to think about why are you here today? If you would like, you can feel free to put your reason in the chat. And if you'd like to keep that more private and just take some notes personally, either way is fine.
Again, before we dive in a little deeper, we're going to take another moment of reflection and to really look at our own SEL mentality here in this moment, in this space today, to understand and acknowledge kind of where we are. So we've all heard the term SEL, or social emotional learning, and over the course of the 18 months, we've probably heard it even more frequently, right? It's become a greater part of our everyday work conversations, kind of our work lexicon. I know a lot of us are hearing our administrators and supervisors and colleagues really talking about the importance of SEL and the best way to incorporate SEL. I also want to acknowledge that this phrase maybe brings up unique thoughts and emotions for us. And I'm going to invite you to just take a moment and sit with that, noticing what emotions arise for you or thoughts or phrases arise for you when you hear the word SEL. We won't ask you to share that out. You can just keep this, create some space to think about this. What comes up for you? Perhaps your thoughts or emotions might be more positive, maybe neutral, maybe on the negative end, and that's okay too. It's important to recognize how we come to the space and how we feel about this, and also noticing that we're not alone in many of our thoughts. Maybe some of these look familiar to you. Maybe they're not thoughts or words that came up for you or come up for you, but perhaps you've heard these phrases at your school site or in talking with other educators. Maybe you've heard, "I don't have time for this," or "That's not my job," right? "I'm a chemistry teacher. I don't teach social emotional learning." Or maybe that this should be taught at home, not at school. Maybe you are a secondary teacher and you've heard, "I teach high school," right? We're not into the emotional stuff, social emotional stuff. That's for elementary school. Or maybe you've heard, "My kids are fine," right? "The behavior in my classroom is great. I don't need this." We recognize it's hard not to have misconceptions about something that we're maybe not so familiar with. So maybe if you've heard these phrases, or maybe even like myself, you've thought these before, that's okay. It's necessary to acknowledge when we're having these thoughts. And today we're going to move forward and establish maybe some more concrete knowledge necessary for either you to better understand SEL and what is meant by the term SEL, and to also share that knowledge with your colleagues at your school sites. But before we dig into integrating SEL into our learning communities, we're going to talk a little bit about where this comes from. So the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, also known as CASEL. We're going to talk about their framework for SEL and why APS has adopted this framework to guide many of our SEL initiatives this year. So what is SEL? The CASEL definition says that SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, to manage emotions, to achieve personal goals, personal and collective goals, to feel and show empathy for others, to establish and maintain supportive relationships, and to make responsible and caring decisions. So in essence, SEL is the component or the vehicle that helps drive us to be successful in life. It helps us to maintain relationships and to be aware and participate productively in our society. SEL skills are therefore vital, both for our students and for ourselves. So this image is probably familiar to a lot of you. This is Castle's wheel of social emotional competencies. And Castle has identified the following competencies or skill sets as the building blocks for social emotional fluency. So self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And you'll notice that these components are color-coded, and that's by design. The orange spokes or the orange kind of sections focus on the internal SEL skills. So that work that focuses on ourselves, the self-awareness and self-management piece. The green spokes are more of those outward-facing skills, right? The ways that we interact with others. So social awareness and relationship skills. And finally, you'll notice that responsible decision-making is yellow because it's kind of a combination of the internal and external work. And you're going to have a greater opportunity to dive into these skills deeper momentarily, both individually and through a discussion protocol. So we're going to kind of take a step backwards and talk about, well, who is CASEL exactly? So the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning is a nonprofit organization that was founded back in 1994. They focus on conducting research on SEL best practices for both children and adults, and use that research to create resources and tools that are accessible to educators and school leaders and policymakers, right? Really all stakeholders in the education system, in the hopes that those stakeholders will have the skills to integrate SEL into learning communities in a productive and impactful manner. So CASEL continues to review kind of this growing body of research and literature in SEL and provides sound guidance on curricula and programs available to educators. And as mentioned before, CASEL is also responsible for creating that wheel of social emotional competencies that you saw on the last slide. And those competencies are really used as the cornerstone for SEL education. The benefits of SEL. I'm not going to read through this. I'll give you an opportunity to just kind of read through these benefits, both for students and adults. Sure, you'll notice this is not an exhaustive list. With our experience, I know that all of us could add to this list. I'm sure you also see many of these benefits. Maybe they stand out to you as really essential aspects of the educational experience, right? And with these benefits in mind, we're going to move forward with our session and explore a protocol that will help us better understand what SEL looks like in practice, in sort of a practical sense.
Which really is the heart of our time together today. We're going to utilize a protocol to examine CASEL's definition of social and emotional learning in the five core competence areas. We'll start by giving you an overview of the protocol steps so you'll know where we're heading. The protocol document with more detailed directions will also be provided before you head to breakout rooms. When you're using a protocol, it's important to establish your what and your why, or your goal and your purpose. Our goal for this work is to consider what CASEL's framework means for implementation at school sites and across APS. Our purpose for using a protocol to do this work is that this protocol provides a structure to build knowledge together. It also creates space to reflect on individual and shared beliefs and allows us to engage in dialogue around what's important and what we can do about it. The protocol begins with time to read pages 1 and 2 of the CASEL framework to explore the CASEL wheel of SEL competencies at a deeper level. To do this, you are going to use the CASEL framework document pictured on this slide. After everyone has had time to read independently, we'll split into small groups and move through the protocol steps. The protocol examines page 1 and page 2 of the readings separately, asking you to apply a different lens to each page. For page 1, the protocol asks you to reflect individually and find a word or phrase on page 1 that you connect to. You'll share your connection point on the Jamboard in your small group and then have time for discussion. For page 2, you'll note questions that are coming up for you and identify something that stands out from page 2 as a priority using the Jamboard. Then you'll have time for another discussion about questions, priorities, and how to move forward. Finally, we'll bring the whole group back together and give time for each small group to share their key points, share what's going well, and what should be the focus going forward. So that's the protocol in a nutshell. We'll provide you with the detailed directions document before you head out to small groups, but for now, let's start with time for everyone to read.
So we're going to take about 7 minutes to read pages 1 and 2 of the CASEL SEL framework document. This document is actually 4 pages long. However, we're only going to focus on page 1 and 2 for today's protocol. If you choose to use this protocol with your staff, you may consider reading all 4 pages. However, we'll limit our focus to the first 2 pages today in order to dive deeper rather than broadly in the content with the time that we have. You can link to the document in either English or Spanish on the slide deck. We'll also go ahead and drop the links to the document in the chat. And we'll set a timer for 7 minutes.
On this slide here, is a reminder about the protocol directions that we reviewed previously with some additional logistics. The revised protocol is in the chat for you, along with the link to the Jamboard that you'll need during breakout rooms. Please open both links as we get ready for breakout rooms. Please remember to select a person to take notes about the discussion's key points and a person to share out when we come back. Note-taking might not look like writing down everyone's thoughts, but instead it is more about ensuring that everyone's voice is represented on the Jamboard as the group discussion moves through the protocol. This is an example of what the Jamboard looks like. The Jamboard frame number corresponds to your breakout room number. The directions will be on the frame as you go through the group protocol that was placed in the chat. You will have 20 minutes for discussion using this protocol, and if you need support, you can request it in your breakout room. We will also check in with each group as you go through this.
Thank you so much for the work you did in your small groups and for engaging with that group reflection. We're now just going to share out sort of kind of the topic of your conversations. So I was just wondering, do we have someone who would be willing to sort of just share what their group kind of highlighted or what you all talked about?
So in our time together, we've covered some of the basic information about SEL and the 5 CASEL competencies, as well as explored the protocol and engaged in reflective practices so we can better understand SEL. As teachers, we want to commit to developing to the whole child if we want our students to be successful, and SEL is the key to this. So we hope you enjoyed our time with us today and found this information valuable. We encourage you to continue exploring SEL resources and reach out to your point of contacts or your behavior support specialist team for more information or to continue this conversation that we've been having around social emotional learning. The last thing that we have for you are some resources. You can access these through the slide deck, and we have our SEL modules. In there, you'll find some general SEL information, folders for each of the 5 CASEL competencies, including example lesson plans and resources. And these are going to be for both elementary and secondary. For the casel.org, it's a website that will connect you with resources and tips and guidance for implementing the SEL CASEL framework. We have the BSS SEL page as a resource. Here you're also going to find links to training videos, sample lesson plans, activities, books, and a ton of other resources that align with the 5 CASEL competencies and as well as other SEL learning. And then we have SEL What Is It?, which is a video that was prepared by one of our BSS members in reviewing what is SEL and what are the basics of SEL. So those are some resources that we've provided for you. And we have, our time is just about up, but if anybody has any quick questions before we leave, if you want to unmute yourself or put anything in the chat, we appreciate you being here with us today.